The morning of July 7th, 2011, started like any other standard Thursday in St. John, New Brunswick. Just before 9, Maureen Adamson pulled up to 52 Canterbury Street. She was there to manage the books for one of the toughest tycoons in the Maritimes, but something felt wrong immediately. The front door was sitting unlocked. She headed up the stairs to the second-floor suite and walked straight into a nightmare. Richard Oland was on the floor, face down, in a sea of red. It was a slaughter. The 69-year-old, known to locals as Dick, hadn't just been killed. He'd been obliterated by 45 separate blows from a weapon that both sliced and crushed. He had fought for his life. His hands were shredded from trying to block the attack. The office was painted in blood spattered across the walls, the desk, and the filing cabinets. This wasn't a random mugging gone wrong. The victim was Dick Oland. In this province, that name is royalty. Along with the Irvings and McCains, the Oland family is one of the dynasties that practically own New Brunswick. They control the economy, the politics, and the social ladder. And at 69, Dick was the face of that power. He was an Order of Canada recipient, the man who brought the Canada Games to town, and a sailor who raced yachts on the world stage. Through his company, Far End Corporation, he moved millions in investments and dumped cash into the region's arts scene. But the man had a dark side. His own daughter would later say he had a special talent for making people hate him. He was sharp, driven, and absolutely brutal to work with. That jagged edge destroyed relationships, a pattern that went all the way back to 1981. That was the year his father, Philip, handed the keys to the Moosehead Brewery Kingdom to Dick's older brother, Derek. Exiled from the family crown jewel founded in 1867, Dick went out and built his own castle. He threw himself into new ventures. He started with Brookville Transport, then moved to Far End Corporation. By 2011, he was sitting on a pile worth nearly $37 million. He proved he didn't need the brewery to win. But the price of that victory was his family. Things were particularly toxic with his 46-year-old son, Dennis. But the tension didn't stop there. Dick had secrets that weren't really secrets. Despite being married to Connie for 46 years, his double life was an open wound for everyone around him. On July 6, 2011, Dick clocked in at his office at 52 Canterbury Street for what looked like another day of trading stocks. The old brick building was his fortress. He spent the day managing his portfolio on the second floor, but as evening fell, he got a visitor. Dennis dropped by, clutching a red reusable shopping bag filled with genealogy charts. That was the last time anyone saw Richard Oland alive. By sunrise, the self-made tycoon would be a cold case waiting to happen, found murdered in his own workspace. It sparked one of the wildest legal battles in Canadian history. Overnight, Dennis went from a grieving son to public enemy number one. At 46, he was suddenly under the microscope. Detectives started tearing apart every interaction he ever had with his demanding father. It was no secret they didn't get along. Dick was impossible to please, and he rode Dennis hard with constant criticism. That relentless pressure shaped Dennis's entire life, building a powder keg of resentment. A disaster, back when Dennis was 20, only made the divide deeper. Dennis had flipped a truck towing one of Dick's prize show jumpers. The $25,000 horse didn't make it. It was another scar on a relationship that was already bleeding. Still, Dennis tried to follow in his father's footsteps, working finance in Toronto before coming home. He landed a gig at CIBC Wood Gundy as an advisor. Then, he made a fatal mistake. He took on his dad as a client. Now the toxicity was professional too. Money bound them together like a vice. When Dennis's marriage imploded, he needed cash. Dick floated him over $500,000 to save his house and pay the lawyers. It was a lifeline, but it came with heavy strings attached. By 2011, Dennis was drowning. He was in the hole $164,000 on his credit line and $31,000 on plastic. He'd already grabbed a $16,000 advance from work. Worst of all, his mortgage check to his dad had just bounced. For a financial advisor, his own ledger was a disaster. Then there was the mistress, Diana Sedlicek. The affair was getting sloppy, and Dennis had even begged a family friend to tell Dick to cool it. It was becoming a public embarrassment. But Dick didn't care. He wasn't going to stop. That brings us to the evening of July 6th. Security footage caught Dennis's silver Volkswagen Golf circling the block like a shark. He drove past 52 Canterbury Street multiple times between 5:17 and 6:12 p.m. Dennis claims he just went up to swap family history notes. He said they chatted for 45 minutes while he held that red shopping bag. Sounds innocent enough, but nobody saw Dick alive after that meeting. Once Maureen discovered the body the next morning, the cops zeroed in on the bloodline. That night, Dennis showed up at headquarters thinking he was just helping out with a routine interview. He played it cool. He even tossed out theories about who might have wanted his dad dead. But then, the detectives started drilling down, and the mood in the room changed. They hit him on the money issues and his timeline. Suddenly, the grieving son looked a lot like a prime suspect. And then, he walked right into a trap. Detective, I just want to be clear on who's coming in and out. When we look at the surveillance tape, I can verify it. Detective, Dennis, look here. These pants, the shoes, a dress shirt, and a navy blazer. Detective, you were wearing that exact outfit, those pants, those shoes. But you're sitting here telling me you were wearing something else? He claimed he was wearing a standard collared shirt paired with a navy blazer, just a generic blue sport coat. But the security tapes told a different story. They captured him wearing a distinct brown Hugo Boss jacket, a garment that would become the smoking gun. The very next morning, once he realized the detectives were circling, Dennis rushed that specific jacket to a local dry cleaner. It took months for the lab work to come back, but the results were damning. Forensics found 4 tiny specks of blood with DNA that was a perfect match to his father. Then there was the digital trail. Richard Oland's iPhone went dark at 6:44 p.m. on July 6th, right after receiving a text from his mistress, Diana Sedlicek. Tower pings placed the device in Rothesay, exactly where Dennis admitted stopping on his drive home. The phone itself? It vanished without a trace. For the St. John police, this wasn't just a high-profile homicide. It was a disaster. The investigation into this national headline was riddled with amateur mistakes. It was a procedural mess. Sergeant Mark Smith, the forensics lead, called it the most gruesome crime scene he had ever walked into. The brutality was staggering. Oland took 45 blows, bludgeoned and stabbed. Wounds on his hands and neck proved he fought hard for his life. The killer didn't stop when Oland hit the floor. The frenzy continued until brain matter splattered onto the victim's own back. It was a slaughterhouse. Blood soaked the desk, the computer, and the walls. It wasn't just a murder. It was an execution born of pure, personal rage. Yet, as the crime scene tape went up, protocol went out the window. Officers used the toilet in the crime scene bathroom. Others stomped through without protective suits. They failed to dust the back exit for prints, leaving a potential getaway route completely unvetted. Deputy Chief Glenn McCloskey even wandered in without clearance. He would later catch heat for merely being there. But through the botched procedure, a few facts remained. Rock solid. Dick's wallet, his Rolex, and his BMW keys were untouched. That eliminated a robbery gone wrong. The thief took nothing of value except that iPhone, which pinged one last time at 6:44 p.m. the previous night. That final signal coincided with the text from Diana Sedlicek. Despite the messy investigation, the crosshairs remained fixed on one man, Dennis. Dennis. The blood-stained jacket was the anchor, but the motive was the chain. Dennis was in the hole to his dad for more than $500,000. He was financially underwater. His credit line was tapped out, and his cards were maxed to the limit. He had even bounced a recent mortgage check written to his father. The pressure was crushing. For 28 long months, Dennis lived with the suspect label hanging over his head. Detectives quietly assembled their puzzle. Then, in November 2013, the St. John police made it official. Dennis Oland was charged with second-degree murder. The charge suggested an impulsive act of fury rather than a plan. But the arrest raised a disturbing question. Did they actually nail the culprit? Or had a bungled investigation simply manufactured a convenient suspect for one of Canada's most controversial trials? September 2015. 4 years post-murder, the trial finally kicked off. It captivated the Maritimes and threatened to air the Oland family's dirty laundry. It promised to drag the skeletons out of the closet of New Brunswick's elite, testing a prosecution case resting precariously on circumstantial threads. The logistics were massive. They summoned a record-breaking 5,000 people for jury duty because the media frenzy made finding an impartial peer nearly impossible. Everyone had an opinion before the first gavel fell. Leading the charge for the Crown was prosecutor P.J. Veniot. Veniot painted a picture of a son snapping under the weight of debt and a lifetime of bullying by a tyrant father. The brown jacket with the blood was their ace in the hole. They stacked the deck. The phone ping on Dennis's route, the lie about his clothes, and the suffocating debt. The narrative was a man pushed off the edge. The defense heavyweights, Toronto's Alan Gold and local ace Gary Miller, had a steep hill to climb regarding the forensics. Their strategy was to tear apart the sloppy police work. They couldn't deny Dennis was there, nor could they deny his father's DNA was on his coat. So, they attacked the chain of custody. Contamination, missing evidence. They argued the blood transfer was accidental and innocent. They claimed the DNA rubbed off because Dennis's jacket shared a closet with his father's clothes during renovations. And they hammered on the brutality. How could someone commit such a savage, bloody hacking and leave zero trace in his car, on his shoes, or anywhere else on his outfit? It didn't add up physically. Meanwhile, the courtroom drama peeled back the layers of the Oland dynasty. Connie, Dick's widow, took the stand. She opened up about her husband's domination and his open affair with Diana Sedlacek. She detailed his explosive temper and the toll it took on everyone, especially Dennis. Then came the mistress, Diana, testifying about her 8-year romance. She revealed Dick's constant disappointment in his son's career. It illustrated a toxic tug-of-war for respect and autonomy between father and son. Then came the moment everyone waited for. Dennis took the stand. Visibly emotional but steady, he swore he didn't do it. He owned the bad blood and the debt. He admitted the money problems were real. As for the blue blazer comment, a simple mix-up, he claimed, not a cover-up. The prosecution didn't buy it. They pounced, calling it a calculated lie designed to distance himself from the blood-soaked evidence. They argued that decades of resentment and financial panic had finally boiled over into a murderous rage. In closing, the defense begged the jury to look at the holes. No murder weapon, no bloody clothes, no hard proof. No one saw him do it, and nothing directly linked him to the strikes. They pointed to the police incompetence and the lack of a smoking gun. It took 65 days of court time and 3 months of testimony. The jury holed up for 30 hours over 4 tense days. Then, on December 19, 2015, the decision landed like a hammer. Guilty. Second-degree murder. It was a shocking conclusion that closed one chapter, but triggered a whole new legal war. That outcome would cast a long shadow over the years to follow. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric with raw emotion, especially for the Oland clan who had stuck by Dennis. They were suddenly grappling with a nightmare scenario. Dennis had just been convicted of killing his own father. Step outside into the streets, however, and the verdict wasn't so clear-cut. The city of St. John was torn in two, half certain of his guilt, the rest convinced the investigation was botched from day one. Fast forward to sentencing in February 2016. Justice Jack Walsh handed down the mandatory sentence. Life behind bars with zero chance of parole for 10 years. He labeled the entire saga a, quote, family tragedy, pointing to the deep-seated dysfunction at the root of it all. Dennis was shipped off to the Atlantic Institution, a hard-time facility in Renouse, New Brunswick. For a guy used to corporate offices and white-collar life, waking up in a maximum security cell must have been a brutal shock. But the family didn't waste time grieving. They launched an appeal immediately. Their angle? The trial judge messed up the instructions to the jury. It all hinged on that brown jacket and Dennis's mix-up about what he was wearing that day. During the trial, Justice Walsh told the jury that if they thought Dennis lied about his clothes, they could take that deception as straight-up proof of guilt. The defense fired back, arguing the judge forgot a crucial alternative. Maybe it wasn't a lie at all, but just an innocent memory slip caused by extreme stress. Nearly a year rolled by before the New Brunswick Court of Appeal weighed in. In October 2016, by a 2-to-1 vote, they threw out the conviction and ordered a do-over. They ruled the jury's guidance was lacking and could have steered them wrong. After sitting in a cell for roughly 10 months, Dennis walked out on bail to wait for round 2. The prosecution tried to kick it up to the Supreme Court of Canada, but the High Court slammed the door on that request. The decision was final. But overturning the verdict did more than free Dennis. It shone a spotlight on major fractures in the case, from the courtroom right back to the initial police work. For the Olands, it was a win, but a heavy one. Dennis had his freedom back, yet the nightmare was nowhere near its end. As he geared up to face the judge again, one question hung in the air. Was this an innocent man being persecuted, or was justice just taking the scenic route? The second trial kicked off in November 2018, over 7 years after Richard Oland met his grisly end. This time, the jury box would sit empty. It was all up to Justice Terence Morrison now. But the proceedings hit a snag right out of the gate. They had to scrap jury selection entirely. Turns out, a police officer had been digging into the backgrounds of potential jurors without authorization, tainting the pool before things even started. With public faith in the system already wobbling, they opted for a judge-only trial. As for the prosecution, they stuck to their original script. End quote. Their theory? Dennis snapped. Fueled by money troubles and a lifetime of resentment, he lashed out in a fit of rage. They pointed again to the evidence. The jacket, with microscopic blood specks, the vanished iPhone, and his shaky story about his outfit. Same cards on the table, but this time, the defense team had an ace up their sleeve. They hammered home the mess at the crime scene, the sloppy detective work, and the total lack of a smoking gun. Their argument was simple. Police developed tunnel vision, locking onto Dennis while ignoring other potential killers, business rivals, casual contacts, or anyone else with an axe to grind. The timeline became the main battlefield. Witnesses claimed they heard a ruckus coming from the office between 7:30 and 8 in the evening. This was Ian, calm, well, 18, my 9, calm, 18, 18, 18, well, 18, 18A. That was long after Dennis supposedly took off. In fact, security cameras caught him back in Rothesay by then, giving him a potential rock-solid alibi. The defense also went for the throat regarding the DNA. They stressed that those blood specks were barely there, microscopic traces that could have landed on him through totally innocent contact. Plus, not a single drop of blood was found in his car, on his shoes, or at his house. Justice Morrison took a long 10 weeks to weigh it all up. It showed just how tangled and heavy this case was. Finally, on July 19th, 2019, almost 8 years post-murder, he dropped the verdict, not guilty. Morrison pointed a finger at the contaminated crime scene and the errors in the investigation, citing the absence of hard proof as grounds for reasonable doubt. But he included a caveat. Just because the evidence didn't prove Dennis did it, didn't mean it cleared him completely. It was a precise, legally airtight ruling, but it left a cloud of moral grayness hanging over Dennis's head. The acquittal closed the book on a decade of legal hell, but the mystery remained. If Dennis didn't bludgeon his father to death, then who is the killer? Thanks to the early screw-ups by police, we might never know. Beyond the mystery, The sheer cost of this saga was staggering. We're talking millions in fees, years of court battles, and a police department's reputation dragged through the mud by its own incompetence. For the public, the Oland saga shifted from a whodunit to a glaring example of a justice system at its breaking point. It all started with Richard Oland's murder on July 6, 2011. Years down the line, the case is still cold. It is a legacy defined not just by a brutal killing, but by the cracks it exposed in the family, the town, and the law itself.